All right, hi there, Dr. Matthew J. Trom here. I'm going to narrate a slide deck for all of our mechanical engineering design courses to illuminate for you the expectations for your final oral presentations. We're going to talk about three kind of big subjects. First is the presentation format. Then we're going to talk about templates you can use, how you'll be assessed, and some tips for success, and then some presentation etiquette and attire. Okay, so here's the format. So every group signed up for a 55-minute slot on the Canvas calendar. 5 of those minutes are mine. The other 50 are yours. In the first 5 minutes, I'm going to talk about or work through the formalities that we have to do at the start of every student presentation, and then I'm going to turn the floor over to you guys, and you guys have got 50 minutes that you can spend however you want. It is suggested that you spend 35 minutes presenting and leave 15 minutes at the end for question and answers with the panel. The format is going to be hybrid and synchronous, meaning you are going to be physically in a room presenting to a group of panelists who are going to be physically in the room with you, but there's also going to be a set of panelists who are equally important watching you synchronously over Zoom. So you have to be aware that you need to cater to both audiences, both in person and online. We ask that you please be punctual, have your entire group there and ready to go before your allotted time slot starts so that we can easily transition from one group to the next. I'll spend that first 5 minutes covering the formalities, and then I will hit the record button, get out of the way, and hand over the floor to you guys to use the remaining 50 minutes however you wish. There have been some questions about whether design students can sit in other groups' presentations to observe. In the past, groups have competed with each other, and they might be doing that this semester. And so there have been problems where a group will sabotage another group by showing up at their presentation and interrupting or asking inappropriate questions. So we ask that you please do not do that. You are welcome to come and attend other presentations as a guest. You could do that either in person or through Zoom, but we ask if you're on Zoom that you please keep your video off and your mic muted. And if you're in person, that you sit quietly and not interrupt and not ask any questions. So we just ask that you be passive observers to be sure that there's no impropriety, no accusations of interference between groups in the class. So I keep talking about this first 5 minutes. So this is an overview of this is in fact the exact slides that I use in those first 5 minutes, just to give you a sense of what that looks like. Now it does get a little repetitive because we have to do this at the start of every single presentation. But some of the panelists can only come to one presentation. They swap in and out. And so everybody needs to be aware of what the rules are before we start. So the first thing I'll mention is that all the presentations are recorded, and participants and panelists who are participating are giving consent to the University of Florida to record their likeness and voice. Second, as I mentioned, that presentations are evaluated by all the panelists present, both in person and online. And I'll describe in just a little bit what that assessment looks like. Presentation slots are 55 minutes, which I've explained before. And then to protect your intellectual property, all the content that you present it remains your IP, and it cannot be shared beyond the University of Florida without your written consent. And I will say that, and then I will remind all the panelists that by sitting in the presentation, they are consenting to the following non-disclosure terms. So first is they will not disclose or publish any part of the presentation or information therein for 5 years. And number 2, they will not make use of the presented information for 5 years. So that includes, in their companies, for-profit purposes. So these clauses protect any intellectual property that you would present that you want to hold close. Okay, so let's talk about template, how you guys get assessed, and tips for success. There is no preset oral presentation template for the design courses. So you can use whatever you want. You can make your own template. You can come up with one from Microsoft PowerPoint. I do have a template that I've created for presentations in other classes that I quite like. And so I've loaded this template onto the Microsoft Teams general folder for the course. And it's available there for you if you want it. You're not required to use it, but it's there if you want it. The College of Engineering also has a template, which maybe looks a little bit more modern. I like my template better, but I'm probably biased. So if you want to use the College of Engineering template, you are welcome to do that too. And here's the URL that gives you access to the college's template. Assessment. This is how you are graded. So every panelist, both in person and online, is going to have basically this piece of paper, or at least electronic piece of paper, sitting in front of them. There are 10 metrics that you're evaluated on, and you're given a score on each metric ranging from 1, which is very poor, to 5, which is excellent on a Likert scale. And because there's 5-point scale and there's 10 metrics, those add up to 50. And so it's possible that your syllabus says that the final oral presentation is something other than 50 points. And so we will scale the total number of points appropriately. But, just imagine these things are essentially out of 50. So when you see your finalized rubrics, you're basically going to be looking at a score out of 50. You will not see the individual rubrics. You'll see an averaged aggregate version of the rubrics where you get the average score across all the metrics, and then an average total final score, and then any comments that the panelists want to make about your presentation. So all that will be sent to you via Canvas after we process all of it after the presentations are over. But just be aware that 6 of these metrics are based on ABET learning outcomes for the Mechanical Engineering Bachelor of Science program. So we want to see that you've solved complex problems by applying STEM principles, that you've applied sound engineering design to produce solutions that meet needs within realistic constraints, that you've communicated your design intent and reasoning, that you demonstrate engineering professionalism when making judgments considering global economic, environmental, and societal factors, that you functioned effectively as a team by demonstrating cohesive, collaborative, and inclusive environment and group presentations, and that you've conducted experiments, analysis, and data interpretation to draw conclusions using your judgment. So a lot of these things tie back to things that we've already done in the class. And so you are welcomed and encouraged to use content that you've generated for your other presentations, your reports, your performance evaluations, and to put all that together into your presentation to be sure that you are addressing all 6 of these ABET linked requirements. In addition to the ABET requirements, there are 4 more that are not necessarily related to ABET, but you're also being evaluated on. So first is demonstrating that you're meeting the customer needs. This is why we have you make the customer needs map, and we show on the map that the customer needs link to the quantitative metrics and then lead through the subsystems to the functions, right? Remember that map? So definitely show that map and demonstrate that you've met all the requirements, all the customer needs, so that you can get high points for number 7. On 8 is demonstrated level of creativity, innovation of the presented design. As we'll talk about in a little bit, it behooves you to spend a little bit of time talking about why your design is the best, why it is so creative and innovative and different than anything else that exists out there on the market. And you're getting evaluated on that. So please spend a slide or 2 talking about your creativity and your innovation. Number 9 is confidence and competence in responding to questions. That's during the Q&A period. And then finally, number 10 is the quality of the presentation. Does it look well put together? Is the technical content sound? So just, be aware that everybody who's a panelist is going to be evaluating you on these 10 points. And so tailor your presentation accordingly. We've had a number of instances where students have gotten really low scores on their final oral presentations, and they'll come back to me to complain, why did I get such a low score? It's you guys gave a great presentation, but you didn't address any of these points. You were off sort of talking about something else. So please be sure to keep this in mind as you're putting your presentations and your slide decks together. Okay, so when we're talking about success in presentation, here's some presentation tips. These I've kind of accumulated over the years of sitting in presentations and getting feedback from panelists on what they thought needed to improve with student presentations. So number one is that all slides must have page numbers. You should notice that all of my slides have page numbers because I'm trying to model appropriate slide format for you. So the reason that you want to have page numbers on there is because the panelists might want you to go back to a particular slide. They're going to jot down the slide number and they're going to say, hey, go to slide number 7. I want to see this. Instead of saying, okay, go back, go back, go back. Oh, yeah, there it is, right? Give them all the tools they need to navigate through your slide deck as cleanly as possible. Number two, introduce all your team members by name in the very beginning. That is just to, demonstrate your professionalism, that everybody in your team is actively engaged, and to get things off on the right foot. Number three, I'm guilty of this quite a bit, but we really want to avoid big walls of text, right? What this slide deck should be is just a primer for you to remind you about what it is that you want to say to the panelist. It should not be paragraphs and paragraphs of text because they are not going to read the text. They are going to listen to what you say. So we have a typical kind of rule of thumb here, which is every bullet point or each bullet point should have no more than 6 words. And again, we want to avoid just big walls of text because nobody's going to read the text that you put up there. They're going to listen to you. Number 4, this one is probably the most important. Start with an overview of the problem that you're solving. Our panelists do receive the customer need statements in advance, but there's no guarantee that they have read them. Some of them don't. They just show up not knowing what the presentations are about. They also do not know these products as well as you guys do because you have been working on them for 15 and in some cases 30 weeks. So assume that you are talking to a group of technically competent, technically educated people, but who know almost nothing about your product. You want to give them kind of a broad, high-level overview of kind of what it is that you're doing, what your goals are, and where you're going, instead of just jumping right in. That's been kind of a big problem, actually, in the past, where students will assume that the panelists know everything there is to know, and they'll immediately jump in without giving an overview, and the panelists are totally lost. So make sure you give them an overview. Number 5 is lead with your hedgehog concept. We started the class with hedgehog concepts and we are going to end with hedgehog concepts because frankly, this is the most important part of the entire engineering design process is you come up with your hedgehog concept, which governs the entire kind of design philosophy of your product. And you really need to demonstrate that you stuck to that. I often tell kind of the joke, but it is a true story in class about the group that got up in front of the panelists and said, we've designed a product whose purpose is to save the whales. And then they started talking about how their product systematically went out and killed all the whales. And it was like, no, your product is exactly opposed to what your hedgehog concept says it should be. And that just demonstrates that you had absolutely no kind of organization or plan when you were doing your design. So make sure that you lead with your hedgehog concept and demonstrate as you walk through your presentation how your product links back to your hedgehog concept to give you kind of that overarching structure to hold everything together. Number 6 is be quantitative. Show calculations to justify your decisions. It's not okay to just be like, this is about this number, or, I thought that maybe this was the right way to go, but I didn't do those calculations to prove it. I just felt like it was right. At this point, you cannot say that. You have to have engineering calculations to back up every single engineering decision that you've made. And you need to show the calculations, at least at a relatively high level, to demonstrate that you calculated the numbers and that your design aligns with the numbers that you calculated. So always be quantitative and err on the side of more numbers rather than less numbers. You're presenting to technical people, to engineers, and they're going to want to see those numbers and to understand how you did the calculations and what assumptions you made to get to the final result. So be very liberal with your use of numbers and your attempts to be quantitative. Number 7 is show as many pictures as possible and show as many videos as possible. This connects in a way back up to number 3, which is no walls of text. The ideal presentation has no words in it at all. It's just picture after picture after picture with you talking about the pictures, putting them into context, describing why they're important and what they mean. You guys have got at least 3 different performance evaluations that you've done. You should have taken pictures and videos while you're doing those evaluations. That's actually part of the assignment. Use those pictures and use those videos in this presentation to demonstrate how your products are meeting the customer requirements. The more pictures and the more videos you have, the better. Number 8 is factors of safety and margin of safety. So you need to justify FOS and MOS when you use them. You guys are engineers, right? So we are expecting you to use factors of safety and margins of safety, not just doing a calculation and saying this vessel needs to be, 2 centimeters thick or else it explodes. So I made it 2 centimeters thick because I like to live dangerously. Don't do that. You need a factor of safety in there for sure, to demonstrate that you're thinking about, the safety and the function and the longevity of your products. Different industries and different product types require different factors of safety, and you should explain upfront why you selected a particular factor of safety. For example, in the aerospace industry, we're expecting a factor of safety of something like 1.1, 1.2, maybe 1.3, because those guys are incredibly concerned with weight, right? So they're basically willing to take on a little bit more risk to reduce weight so that their aircraft or spacecraft function, as needed. In the automotive industry, you might consider a factor of safety of something like 2 or 3. They still, have weight and cost concerns, but they're not nearly as severe as in the aerospace industry. And of course, in the auto industry, they could take on, less risk than they can in the aerospace industry. So factors of safety are going to be higher. So please justify your factors of safety before you give them. Explain why you selected a particular value. Don't just say, oh, it was 1.7 and I don't know why. You actually have to explain why. Some of our panelists think in factor of safety, some of them think in margin of safety based on what industry they're from. So my suggestion is to use both numbers. They're basically just 2 different ways of communicating the same information. So just use them both and just be aware that you have kind of a diverse audience that comes from a variety of different industries. The next sort of element of this is you might end up in a situation where the factor of safety that you calculate is significantly higher than your target value. If it's lower, you have a problem, right? You need to redesign. But if it's higher, that sometimes happens. Do not try to sweep that under the rug, gloss it over, ignore it. And definitely spend time explaining it, because if you don't, the panelists are immediately going to jump in and say, well, we expected a factor of safety of 2 and this part has a factor of safety of 10. It's definitely over designed and you've done a bad job designing it because it's way overkill for what you need. There are situations where you get high factors of safety. One great example is if you are buying parts commercial off the shelf that have all of the features and all the functions that you want, but they're just, a little beefier than what you need, but would end up being much less expensive to acquire than making that part yourself. That's a situation where you could end up with a part that has a really high factor of safety, but you pick it anyway because it's the best option to keep the cost down. So if this happens, if you get a high factor of safety, explain why. And if you don't, I assure you, the panelists will start questioning you about why your factors of safety are so high and start questioning whether or not you've over designed. So pay special attention to that one. Number 9 is explain why your design is the best in the class. Now, let me give this sort of as a caveat that we do not want you to disparage other groups. Don't say anything bad about any of your classmates. But you should spend a little bit of time, a slide or 2, explaining why the panelists, if they were interested in taking your design and either propagating it forward into the next semester of Capstone or turning it into a commercial product, why they should select your design over any of the other ones that might be available to them. That's an important element that just communicates confidence in your design process that you want to spend some time on. And then number 10 is be prepared for the Q&A session at the end with backup slides. Now, what do I mean by backup slides? These are slides that go after the last slide in your slide deck that you plan to present that contain all of the kind of deep dive, detailed information, extra drawings, extra schematics, all the things that you don't have time to talk about in your, nominally 35 minutes, but that just are things that you can reference if a question comes up where somebody wants to take a deep dive into one of your engineering calculations. Probably the absolute best way to handle a difficult question is if the panelists ask a hard question for the team to say, well, panelist, I'm really glad that you asked that question because I prepared a backup slide on that. And you go into your backup slides and you pull up the appropriate slide to demonstrate that you are incredibly well prepared for their questions because you thought about what they were going to ask and you have a slide to explain it. That usually shuts down any kind of technical attacks really quickly because you communicate to the panelists that you've thought really deeply about your product and all the different kinds of technical questions that they could ask. Okay, so let's talk about presentation attire and etiquette. We'll start with some etiquette. Here's another top 10 list, wall of text, sorry, but here we go. So the first one is to please troubleshoot your technology in advance. There's going to be a lot of things happening. These are probably PowerPoint presentations happening on Zoom, in front of a live audience with other audience members kind of in Zoom in the background. And if you are embedding, for example, videos in your PowerPoint slides, make sure that you know how to click on them to get them to run and make sure that they run well in advance of the presentation. I've been in situations where we've had PowerPoint presentations embedded in videos and students have forgotten to include the video file. They'll just spend all their time clicking on what's effectively a static image and never getting the video to run. You're burning through time and you also look like kind of a doofus because you're an engineer who doesn't know your technology. So make sure that all your technology works as you expect it to in advance. This is also true for product prototypes. If you bring a prototype in to demonstrate, which I recommend you do if you have a small enough prototype to bring into the presentation, make sure that the thing works before you hand it to the panelists or demonstrate it to the panelists. Worst possible thing is to say, here's my widget, and you turn it on and nothing happens, right? Again, you sort of look like a doofus unless you've actually tested in advance and made sure that your technology works. Number 2 is dress and groom appropriately. I have some specific slides on that, so we'll get back to that in a little bit later. Number 3 is to time yourself in advance. Give your presentation as a group several times in advance before you do it for real. Make sure that you can fit everything into, ideally, that 35-minute time block without going over. I say here, don't exceed time. We have 55-minute blocks for a reason. It's because we stagger you guys one group after another. And the moment that a 55-minute window closes, another group is going to be in that room getting ready to give their presentation. And so we are going to be very strict about cutting you off right as your 55-minute window closes. So do not exceed your time limit. Also, please make sure that you leave time at the end for Q&A. We've had groups burn through their entire 55 minutes and panelists have not been able to ask any questions at all. That makes them very upset and they give those students very low scores on the presentation because they want to be able to interact with you and ask questions and see how you respond to those technical questions. So make sure that you can get your entire presentation done in nominally 35 minutes and you leave time at the end for Q&A. To this point, practice smooth transitions between speakers. Make sure you know who is responsible for which slide and that you have some sort of meaningful presentation transition from one presenter to the next so that presentation transitions don't look sort of awkward or unplanned, or you're not sure who's talking next. That both kind of speeds things up so that you can get the presentation done in your allotted time, and it increases the perception among the panelists that you guys practiced and are looking and acting like professionals. Number 5 is to make eye contact and look at the audience. This is specifically for whoever is speaking at a particular moment. So I know some of you guys are introverts, right? We're engineers, we're socially awkward, that's normal. But if you are kind of looking off in the distance, or particularly if you're turned around and you're looking behind you at the slides the entire time and not making eye contact with the audience, your communication score on that metric is going to be bad. So please make eye contact and look at the audience and engage them as much as you can. Also, for those of you who are not speaking, but who are, I'd like to have everybody speak, but only one of you should be speaking at a time. For those of you who are not speaking, continue to be engaged and excited about what is being presented. Can't tell you the number of times where a student team will present and the one person who's presenting is very dynamic and everyone else will just sort of be like staring at the wall or picking their nose or looking at their cell phone, or, I don't know what they do, but make it look as if whoever is presenting is the most exciting, dynamic, interested person that you could possibly imagine, and exude enthusiasm for what they are saying. Because if you demonstrate that you are excited about what your classmates, your teammates are saying, the panelists will be too. So even if you're not speaking, this is a great opportunity for you guys to kind of help your teammates along by demonstrating interest in what they are saying as they present. Number 7, I've said this before, but I'll mention it again. Be aware of your presence both in person and online. You have to please both audiences, both the panelists in the room in front of you and those on Zoom. So just be aware of what's going on around you. Look at the camera projection every now and again to make sure that you are actually in the frame. We've had situations where entire groups will just walk out of the camera frame and never walk back into it. And the Zoom panelists have said, I didn't even know who was talking. I didn't know what they were saying. I didn't know, who was who, because I couldn't see anybody on my camera. So just be aware of what you look like on Zoom as you are presenting in person, and make sure that you are appropriately framed in the camera so the folks on Zoom can see you. Number 8, be respectful and thoughtful with the panelists. Yes, you guys have been working on these projects for 15, maybe 30 weeks. You know your product better than anybody else. Nonetheless, the panelists are subject matter experts. Most of them are engineers. They're technically trained people. And when they ask a question and you respond and they say something that might be technically incorrect, it is not okay to start fighting with them and attacking them. We've had that happen in the past where, team members have said, oh, no, guy with a PhD who worked at NASA for 30 years, you're just wrong. Like, I'm right, and I'm going to fight you on this. And that does not end well. That person is in charge of your grade and will rate you very badly in professionalism. So if you run into a situation where the panelists are saying something that is technically incorrect, just be respectful and thoughtful, and just sort of agree to disagree, and move on and say, we'll address that question offline afterwards. And then definitely address the question with them offline afterwards, right? They might know something you don't know, which is very important. But once the recording is done and once kind of the formality of the presentation is over, you're welcome to, talk with the panelists and sort of set them straight on something that they got technically wrong. But it is not a good idea to fight them in the middle of the presentation. So just be respectful and thoughtful in all those interactions. Number 9, do not bury your face in notes. It is perfectly okay to have a set of note cards or a small piece of paper in front of you that gives you some guidance on what to say, especially because, like I said, I don't want you to turn around and be talking to the slides behind you when the audience is in front of you. So having note cards is perfectly fine. But there have been situations where students will just take their piece of paper and stick it right in front of their face. I don't know if you can see, there we go. Stick it right in front of their face and basically disappear from the audience, and just be buried in their notes. So, you're welcome to have notes if it helps you, but please don't hide behind your notes. Just use them by glancing at them, momentarily from time to time to, help you keep pace. And finally, Be aware of your cadence. And by cadence, I mean just, the timing of how fast you talk. You definitely want to keep things within that 50-minute window, but you don't want to speak too quickly. You don't want to sound like a guy, trying to auction off a new car or something like that. Blah, 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 blah. Because if the panelists can't understand what you're saying, they are not going to rate you well. So just talk slowly, talk with confidence, talk with professionalism, not too fast, and practice in advance to be sure that you can say everything that you want to say within that kind of 35-minute or 50-minute time block. There is a tendency when you are in front of a panel to start to get nervous and to talk faster. So just be aware that that is a phenomenon that happens to many human beings when they're doing public speaking. And just pace yourself accordingly with the appropriate cadence to appear confident and professional. So let's transition to what to avoid. This is, maybe a little humorous. It's sort of meant to be, but this is a slide that I gave during COVID when everybody was presenting from home. So this might not necessarily apply to you guys since you're going to be, in a conference room environment. But there are some things on this slide that are important that I'll mention. This was an interactive exercise with the students where I gave them this picture of me, and then I asked them to point out everything that was wrong with the picture in terms of kind of professional presentation rules. So because this is a asynchronous presentation now, I'm just going to give you the answer. But a couple things that I want to point out. So first is I intentionally did not shave for 3 days before I took this picture of myself, so that I had a little bit of a 72-hour shadow here. So definitely be aware of your grooming and make sure that you're showered and cleaned up and you're looking good and professional for your presentations. Also, in the same vein, I wore just a informal University of Florida t-shirt. I'm going to talk about dress code in a little bit, but wearing a t-shirt is not a good idea. This probably won't happen because, again, we're going to be in a conference room environment, but sort of be aware of what you're bringing into the room with you. I intentionally brought a bottle of beer into this presentation so that I could point out that I was drinking a beer during my presentation, which is a vice activity that you probably don't want to do, or similar stuff like this. In the formal presentation. So for you guys, this might be something like constantly checking your phones or checking your Apple Watches in the middle of the presentation, or having one of your cell phones go off in the middle of the presentation. Make sure that those are all turned off so that they don't become a distraction. The other thing is to be aware of your surroundings. So I intentionally opened my closet for this picture, and you can see kind of the mess of crafting stuff and binders and stuff in the closet. That's a distraction. And then I had this very, very messy bookshelf behind me, which I did not clean up, which is also a distraction. So just, be aware of the room around you. This probably doesn't apply, significantly to you guys because, again, you'll be in a conference room, but be aware of things like cords on the ground. If you're giving a demonstration of your prototypes, make sure that you can show the prototype to the camera, that it's not being obscured by a computer or a phone or something else that's sitting in the room. Make sure that your faces are visible. I mentioned this before, to not bury yourselves behind a piece of paper. So just be aware of your surroundings, both for the people in person and the folks on Zoom, and make sure that you're not inducing the number of distractions, because the environment in and around the room is distracting. You guys have probably heard me refer to this before, and I'm probably dating myself here a little bit, but when I was a kid, there was this really hilarious set of kind of college movies called Revenge of the Nerds. And there was a character named Dudley Dawson who had a nickname of Booger. This is Booger. And so you might have heard me refer to the Who Farted shirt. Well, this is what I mean. So here's Booger in his Who Farted shirt, right? You can see it's actually got these sort of blown out holes in it. This is an example, again, of kind of what not to do when you think about what you want to wear to a formal presentation. So, not clean shaven, messy hair, sunglasses, Who Farted shirt. So when I say, don't get on the Who Farted shirt, this is the image that I'm talking about, which allows us now to transition to attire. So, which is the last subject. So, there's actually a wonderful article in Business Insider magazine from 2018, which is entitled "How to Dress Your Best in Any Work Environment, from a Casual Office to a Boardroom." And there's sort of these 4 quadrants of attire for professional environment. For these presentations, you guys need to target these bottom 2 parameters. So I say here, executive casual with tie for men or traditional business attire. So it's the bottom 2 quadrants of this overall 4 frame quad chart. So with the caveat, especially for male presenters, guys, you need to have a tie on. That's kind of the barrier to entry, or the cost of entry for a formal presentation to technologically savvy people, is demonstrate your professionalism, please, by wearing a tie. It's okay to wear sport jacket, slacks. You don't necessarily need a matching 2-piece or 3-piece suit, but guys, definitely have a tie on. I will have a tie on, even though I'm not presenting, because that's just the level of professionalism and formalism that you want to communicate. For other students, just take a look at kind of the executive casual all the way up to the traditional business attire, and make appropriate decisions, based on kind of trying to land within one of these 2 quadrants. Okay, that brings us to the end of the narrated slide deck. I appreciate your time and attention, and I look forward to seeing your presentations.